She was suffocating, duct tape wrapped around her neck, a trash bag over her head, and the woman killing her? Her so-called best friend. The same woman who had been sleeping with her husband for over a year. But here's the twisted part. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated, planned, and it all started with a simple question. What if she just disappeared? 3 people entered that trailer on February 15th, 2009. Only 2 walked out. And what they did to the third will haunt you forever. This is the story of how jealousy, obsession, and a toxic love triangle led to one of the most brutal murders in Florida history. Before we dive into this nightmare, I want to thank every single subscriber who makes this channel possible. Your support means everything. And if you're new here and love deep dive true crime stories that don't hold back, hit that subscribe button. You're about to see exactly why this channel is different. Now, let me ask you something. How far would you go for love? Would you kill for it? Because today's story involves a woman who did exactly that, and the victim was someone she called her friend. Our story begins with Emilia Carr, born on August 4th, 1984, in McIntosh, Florida. But this isn't your typical childhood story. From the moment Emilia could walk, she was living in hell. Her father and grandfather, the 2 men who should have protected her, were her predators. Night after night, young Emilia would lie in bed, listening for the creak of floorboards outside her room. She knew what was coming. She knew no one would save her. When authorities finally discovered the abuse, they removed all 4 children from the home. Her father was arrested. But here's where the system failed her completely. He wasn't sent to prison. Instead, he was ordered to complete a court-mandated program. The authorities believed he would reform. They were wrong. The children were sent back to that house of horrors. The abuse resumed. And Emilia's mother? She knew. She saw her daughters suffering. She did nothing. When Emilia turned 15, she feared for her younger sister. She couldn't protect herself, but maybe she could save someone else. So she told the school administrators everything. Her father was arrested again. This time, charges were filed. But instead of facing justice, Emilia's father decided to eliminate the problem. He hired a hitman to kill his wife, mother-in-law, and eldest daughter. The daughter who had the courage to speak up. The only reason you're hearing this story today is because that hitman was an undercover police officer. 10 years of abuse. Attempted murder of his own family. You know what sentence he received? 4 years. 4 years for destroying his daughter's childhood and trying to have her killed. But those 4 years gave Emilia something she'd never had. Freedom. She discovered photography. She worked in modeling. She even enlisted in the military. For the first time in her life, she could breathe. But the damage was done. Emilia was 17 when she became pregnant by a man much older than her. To avoid legal trouble for him, she married him. The marriage was doomed from the start. What followed was a pattern that would define her life. Toxic relationships, one after another. She had 3 children with 3 different men. She got involved in criminal activities, even helping an ex-husband steal exotic birds. By 21, she was a single mother of 3, spiraling out of control. That's when she made a decision that probably saved her life. She earned her high school diploma. She trained as a massage therapist. She started earning decent money. She was trying to turn her life around. And that's when she met the couple who would change everything. Joshua Fulgham and Heather Strong had been together since high school. They were 3 years older than Emilia, and they seemed to have their lives together. But appearances can be deceiving. Joshua Fulgham was born on August 16, 1981, in Mississippi. Like Emilia, his childhood was a nightmare. When he was 7, his mother brought home a new partner who beat Joshua mercilessly. The boy was constantly covered in bruises, suffered multiple head injuries, and was eventually expelled from school. The only person who understood him was his grandmother. She was his lifeline, his protector. When she died during his teenage years, Joshua lost the only anchor he had in the world. What happened next was predictable. He turned to alcohol and drugs. He committed arson and burglary. At 16, he was in and out of juvenile detention centers. His life was spiraling toward nothing. Then he met Heather Strong. Heather was 16, working as a waitress. She was kind, gentle, always smiling. When they met at a cafe, it was instant attraction. Young love at its purest. When a family member attacked Heather at home, Joshua and his mother took her in. That's how the couple began living together. At 18, Heather became pregnant with Joshua's child. For a moment it seemed like love might conquer all. Joshua got a job in trailer construction. They could afford their own place. They had a future. But addiction doesn't care about love. Joshua fell back into using illegal substances. He lost his job. Their world crumbled. To fund his habit, he started selling drugs. When that wasn't enough, he began producing them. The drugs changed him. The gentle boy Heather fell in love with became angry, volatile, aggressive. He started hitting her. He started cheating on her. He became a stranger. Heather would pack her things and leave, taking their child to her grandmother's house. Joshua would clean up, beg her to come back, promise he'd changed. And she would believe him. She would return. The cycle would repeat. During one of these cycles, Heather became pregnant again. They looked at their unstable life and made a heartbreaking decision. When the baby was born, they gave her up for adoption. This broke something in Joshua. He realized he was going to lose everything if he didn't change. In 2003, 21-year-old Joshua and Heather moved to Florida to start fresh near Joshua's other grandmother. Everything was going well until they met Emilia Carr. At the time they met, Emilia was dating Jamie Ake, a friend from school and the father of one of her children. Their relationship was complicated. They were constantly breaking up and getting back together. When Joshua and Heather moved to Florida, the two couples became friends. They spent time together, hung out as a group of 4. Everything seemed normal. But then Heather became pregnant with her 3rd child. Instead of becoming a loving father, Joshua relapsed. He became aggressive again. He was angry that Heather, due to her pregnancy, refused intimacy, so he started looking elsewhere. A mutual friend of theirs died in a car accident. Joshua and Emilia were devastated. They needed comfort. They needed someone to understand their pain. They couldn't think of anything better than to sleep together. From that moment, their affair began. Emilia and Jamie were on a break, so he had no idea. The lovers met almost every day. But pregnant Heather had no clue their relationship was more than just friendship. When Heather gave birth, all the childcare fell on her shoulders. Joshua found it far more entertaining to spend time with Emilia than to care for his newborn baby. This affair lasted nearly a year. Can you imagine? For almost a year, Heather was raising their child alone, while her partner was sleeping with someone she considered a friend. When Heather finally discovered the truth, she was devastated. She packed her things, took the children, and returned to Mississippi. That's when Joshua realized what he'd lost. You don't value what you have until it's gone. He realized he needed Heather, not Emilia. Emilia was just a way to satisfy his needs. He was never in love with her. Joshua ended things with Emilia and went to Mississippi to win back Heather. He got down on his knees. He swore he would never look at another woman. He promised he would change. Heather believed him. She always did. They lived in Mississippi for 5 months. Everything was wonderful, until they decided to return to Florida. Moving back to Marion County brought everything back to square one. Joshua almost immediately started drinking and using drugs again. He became aggressive. The arguments started. The cycle resumed. After another breakup, Joshua ran back to Emilia. But this time, Heather didn't just walk away. She wanted him back too. What happened next was unlike anything you've ever heard. All 3 of them entered into a polyamorous relationship. Joshua was living with both women. There were even rumors that Heather and Emilia were involved with each other. But here's the thing about polyamory. It only works when everyone truly consents, when there's no jealousy, when everyone is getting what they need. That wasn't the case here. Both women dreamed of being the only one for Joshua. Neither was satisfied with the arrangement. Both tolerated it out of fear of losing the man they loved. This toxic triangle continued for months. Joshua would leave one woman for the other, then return. It was emotional torture for everyone involved. By June 2008, Heather had enough. She was 26 years old and didn't want to spend her entire life competing for Joshua Acehart. She decided to break up, this time for good. Heather had been working part-time as a nanny for a single man named Ben. After breaking up with Joshua, she quickly started a romance with Ben. Their children were about the same age. Heather liked Ben's calm demeanor. Finally, she could enjoy life coming home to someone who treated her with respect. But Joshua wasn't going to let Heather be happy without him. When he realized Heather had actually moved on, he became literally obsessed. He started stalking both Heather and Ben. He would drive by Ben's house at night. He would wait for them on the street. He would threaten violence if they didn't break up. One day he broke into Ben's house armed with a gun, demanding they end their relationship. Meanwhile, Joshua was still living with Emilia, who didn't seem to care that her boyfriend was obsessed with his ex. Or maybe she was willing to tolerate it as long as he stayed with her. November 2008 arrived. Heather and Ben had been in a stable relationship for 5 months. Everything was wonderful. Joshua and Emilia were also living together. That summer, Emilia had become pregnant. In November, when she was about 4 months along, Joshua proposed to her. The news of the engagement quickly reached Heather. Her good mood vanished. She had given Josh 3 children. She had stood by him through his worst times. She had endured his unbearable behavior. Yet another woman received the proposal. This deeply hurt Heather. She began re-evaluating her relationship with Ben and concluded that she was still in love with Joshua. After telling Ben she wanted to end things, Heather called Joshua and said she wanted to reconcile. Between Emilia and Heather, Joshua always chose Heather. He immediately broke things off with pregnant Emilia and asked her to return the engagement ring. A few days later, Joshua proposed to Heather with the same ring. A month later, they registered their marriage. 10 minutes after the wedding ceremony, Joshua called Emilia for a friendly chat. 10 minutes. That's how long their honeymoon lasted. Within days of the wedding, the couple began arguing. There was no honeymoon period. Things were so bad that a week and a half after the wedding, Joshua pointed a shotgun at Heather's face and threatened to shoot her. Heather, terrified, called the police. Joshua was arrested and charged with assault with a firearm. He was sent to jail to await trial. While Joshua was in jail, Heather began dating Jamie Ock, Emilia's ex-boyfriend, and the father of one of her children. Remember, Jamie was also Joshua's best friend when they first moved to Florida. During this time, Emilia visited Joshua in jail. The man was furious at Heather for putting him behind bars, even though he was the one who threatened to shoot her with a shotgun. Joshua was convinced his wife had deliberately set him up to ruin his life. Now Joshua and Emilia were together again, and Joshua constantly vented his grievances about Heather. Wanting to be the only one, Emilia encouraged his anger. Deep down, she wanted her rival gone from their lives forever. In Emilia's view, the only way to stay with Joshua was to get rid of Heather Strong. She kept telling Joshua that if Heather wanted, he would lose his children. Something had to be done about it. Joshua was already on edge in jail, and Emilia kept pressing his sore spots. At some point it worked. Joshua no longer wanted Heather back. Now he wanted to be with Emilia alone. The wildest part of this situation was that Emilia and Heather were still on good terms. They weren't best friends, but they communicated normally. Emilia sometimes looked after Heather's children when she needed to step out. Emilia would come to Heather's house and try to convince her to drop the charges against Joshua. She tried to stay calm until she learned that Heather was dating Jamie Ack. At that moment, everything changed. Emilia lost her temper. She grabbed a knife, held it to Heather's throat, and demanded that the woman drop the charges. Eventually, Emilia calmed down. But at that moment, she harbored a serious grudge against her rival. The irony was that Emilia was sleeping with Heather's husband, yet she felt betrayed that Heather was dating her ex-boyfriend. Emilia began going to all her acquaintances, friends, and relatives, offering them $500 to go to Heather's house and break her neck. She was literally following in her father's footsteps, who had hired a hitman to kill his family because they turned him into the police. It got to the point where Emilia went to Jamie and offered him money to kill his girlfriend. The people she approached thought it was a joke. No one agreed. But the information reached Heather and terrified her. The woman dropped the charges against Joshua. On February 6, 2009, after spending a month behind bars, Joshua was released. Events were about to take a tragic turn. Upon leaving jail, Joshua decided he urgently needed to see his children. He went to Heather's house where he learned she was now dating Jamie, his best friend. Moreover, Jamie was now driving Joshua's car. Joshua was furious that his wife had replaced him so quickly. He yelled, cursed, and then declared he would take custody of their children away from Heather. She responded that he wouldn't see the children at all until he changed his behavior. The craziest part of this mess was that the children were the ones suffering. Heather and Joshua had 2 children. Emilia had 3 children from different fathers and was pregnant with a 4th from Joshua. These innocent kids were caught in the middle of adult chaos. Joshua didn't hear that all he needed to do was change his behavior. From his wife's words, he concluded that she was going to return to Mississippi and take the children with her so he could never see them again. Joshua grew angrier, and Emilia kept pouring fuel on the fire, telling him that Heather needed to pay dearly. 9 days after Joshua was released from jail, Heather Strong disappeared. On February 15, 2009, Heather didn't show up for her shift as a waitress at a cafe at a gas station. She had never missed work before. Such behavior was completely out of character for her. Even more suspicious was that earlier that day, Heather called her boyfriend Jamie through tears, saying that Joshua was coming to pick up his children. She also said she would try to convince Joshua to leave them alone. Jamie was used to the constant drama between the former spouses, so he didn't pay much attention to the call. But when he returned home from work that evening, neither Heather nor the children were there. Some of their belongings were also gone. Jamie tried calling Heather, but she didn't answer. Then he called Joshua, and Joshua told him that Heather had come back to him, and they were a family again. He asked Jamie not to bother them anymore. Jamie wasn't even surprised. He had long accepted that Heather and Joshua would periodically get back together and break up, so he sadly let it go. 10 days passed since Heather disappeared. Joshua told everyone that his wife had brought him the children and then left for Mississippi because she needed a break. But that didn't sound like Heather at all. People began to suspect something was wrong. Heather would never have left her children with Joshua for such a long time because she didn't trust him. Gradually, the rumors reached Mississippi. Heather's family was very surprised. They hadn't heard from her in almost 2 weeks. Her relatives raised the alarm and reported Heather missing. The police immediately began an investigation. Joshua was the first suspect, as the authorities were already aware of domestic violence in the family. Joshua told the police that Heather had brought the children, and then left for Mississippi to rest and gather her thoughts. He even showed the officers a document where the woman voluntarily transferred custody of the children to him. There were no grounds to charge Joshua, but the police's suspicions didn't go away. On March 18th, just over a month after Heather's disappearance, the police received a report that cash had been withdrawn from Heather's bank card at an ATM. Detective immediately checked the surveillance footage and discovered that Joshua had used the missing woman's card. That was enough to arrest him. During the interrogation, the officers learned that there was another key witness who played a role in Heather's disappearance, Emilia Carr. The woman voluntarily came to the station, expressing a desire to assist the investigation. She was very convincing and played the role of a concerned friend. Joshua and Emilia were questioned simultaneously, but in separate rooms. The officers wanted to get a confession from them. Soon, the police learned that Emilia had offered acquaintances $500 to kill her best friend. They also found out that during one argument, the woman had held a knife to Heather's throat and threatened to kill her. The detectives began pitting Joshua and Emilia against each other, telling both that one of them had already confessed, but was trying to pin the crime on their accomplice. Emilia quickly realized she needed to save herself and declared she would tell the truth if granted immunity from prosecution. Of course, the detectives couldn't agree to this. They decided to press Joshua harder, and he broke. The interrogations lasted several days and were exhausting. Finally, Joshua confessed. He didn't take Heather's life directly, but he was still guilty. On February 15, 2009, the day Heather disappeared, Joshua snapped. He genuinely believed his wife would take his children and prevent him from seeing them. Much of this was due to Emilia, who constantly provoked him. First, they needed to lure Heather to Emilia's trailer. According to Joshua, they promised her money. Heather brought the children to her husband S. house and then somehow ended up at her rival S. trailer. Inside, an argument broke out between the spouses. During the argument, an enraged Emilia stormed in and hit Heather on the head with a flashlight. Heather lost consciousness. Seizing the moment, the conspirators sat her in a computer chair, bound her hands and feet with duct tape, and taped her mouth shut so she couldn't make a sound. When the captive came to, Joshua showed her a document where she voluntarily transferred custody of the children to him and demanded she sign it. At first, Heather adamantly refused, so Joshua resorted to threatening her life. If Heather didn't voluntarily give up the children, Joshua promised to kill her. Heather ultimately signed the document, and that should have been the end of the story. Joshua technically got what he wanted. But then Emilia stepped in and convinced Joshua that letting Heather go was dangerous because she would find a way to get revenge. The only way to silence her was to get rid of her once and for all, and Joshua agreed with her. First, Emilia tried to break Heather's neck, relying on her skills as a massage therapist, but she simply didn't have the strength. Then she put a trash bag over her rival's head and wrapped duct tape around her neck to suffocate her, but that didn't work either. Finally, Emilia approached Heather and pinched her nose shut, cutting off her air supply. The victim's mouth was taped shut, so she had no way to breathe. For a while, Heather tried to resist, but soon her body went limp. After that, Joshua and Emilia put the woman's body in a suitcase and buried it in the backyard when no one was around. Joshua led the detectives to the spot and showed them where his wife Heather Strong's remains were hidden. Now, the police had Joshua's confession, but Emilia still hadn't said anything. The detectives had no evidence proving her involvement in the crime and had no idea how to get the truth out of her. That's when Joshua's sister, Michelle, stepped in. The woman came to the police station herself and said she could get a confession from Emilia Carr. Michelle didn't want her brother to be convicted for someone else's crime. The investigators arranged a meeting between Michelle and Emilia, equipping Joshua's sister with a listening device beforehand. The women were friends, so a walk in the park together wasn't unusual for them. Michelle insisted that Emilia tell her the truth, and Emilia, unaware that her friend was wearing a wire, fully corroborated Joshua's story, describing how they tried various ways to kill Heather. She had no idea the detectives were listening to her entire account. That was essentially all the police needed. Emilia Carr and Joshua Fulgham were charged with kidnapping and first-degree murder. While in jail awaiting trial, Emilia gave birth to her fourth child, who was immediately given up for adoption. Her other 3 children, as well as Heather and Joshua's 2 children, were placed in foster families. The irresponsible parents, unable to sort out their own lives and relationships, had ruined the lives of several young children. 18 months later, in 2010, the case finally went to trial. Emilia Carr was the first to face the jury. She pleaded not guilty. The Carr family issued a statement that due to the abuse she suffered from her father and grandfather as a child, Emilia was traumatized, which could have affected her mental state. Her lawyer tried to portray the defendant as a victim under Joshua's strict control and influence. But the prosecution only needed to present the recording of her confession, and the young woman's true nature was immediately exposed. The jury found Emilia Carr guilty of first-degree murder. Next, they had to decide what punishment the defendant should face. The grand jury voted 7-5 to sentence Emilia to death. At the age of 24, Emilia was placed on death row and became the youngest woman to receive such a severe verdict. She was officially sentenced to death by lethal injection on February 22, 2011. A year later, in April 2012, Joshua's trial took place. He also pleaded not guilty. However, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the same crime, as the jury's opinions were divided. 8 voted for life imprisonment, while 4 voted for the death penalty. In the end, jealousy didn't just kill Heather Strong, it destroyed everyone it touched. Emilia Carr sits on death row, waiting for an injection that will end her life. Joshua Fulgham will die in prison. And 5 innocent children grew up without parents because 3 adults couldn't handle their emotions. But here's what haunts me most. Heather called Jamie through tears that final day, saying she would try to convince Joshua to leave them alone. She was still trying to make peace, even at the end. She had no idea her best friend was already planning her murder. This case shows us that sometimes the people closest to us are the most dangerous. Trust can be a weapon, and love can be a motive for murder. Heather Strong was 26 years old when she died. She was a mother, a girlfriend, a daughter. She worked as a waitress and a nanny. She was trying to build a stable life for herself and her children. Her only crime was loving someone who didn't deserve her love. Her only mistake was trusting someone who called her a friend. Emilia Carr and Joshua Fulgham didn't just take Heather's life. They orphaned 5 children, They destroyed families. They proved that evil doesn't always come from strangers in the night. Sometimes it comes from the people who share your bed, who eat at your table, who hold your children. If this story affected you the way it affected me, show your support by hitting that like button. Subscribe for more deep dive true crime content that doesn't shy away from the brutal truth. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a case. And tell me in the comments, what do you think drove Amalia to murder? Was it jealousy, desperation, or something darker? I read every comment, and your insights help shape future videos. Remember, the best way to honor victims like Heather Strong is to never forget their stories. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Let's make sure Heather's story reaches as many people as possible. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, evil often wears a familiar face.